The champagne glass slipped from my trembling fingers as I stared at the caller ID displaying Harvard University Admissions Office. Around me, the graduation party at the Blackwood estate continued in full swing, my family's laughter echoing through the marble halls as they toasted my brother Damien's latest promotion at his law firm. But their celebration wasn't for me. Just minutes earlier, my own mother had stood before our extended family and proclaimed that I was destined for mediocrity and would likely amount to nothing more than a burden on society. The phone rang again, insistent and life-changing, while I stood frozen in the corner of the ballroom where I'd been relegated to serve drinks to the guests who had come to celebrate everyone's success except mine. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The irony wasn't lost on me that this moment was unfolding in the very room where, 18 years earlier, my parents had announced my birth to their social circle, as if I were some kind of consolation prize. The Blackwood family had always been about appearances, achievements, and maintaining their status as one of Millbrook Heights' most prestigious families. Our estate sat on 12 acres of perfectly manicured grounds, complete with a tennis court, swimming pool, and gardens that required a team of landscapers to maintain. The house itself was a testament to old money, with its sweeping staircase, crystal chandeliers, and walls lined with portraits of successful Blackwood ancestors who had built their fortune in shipping and real estate over the past century. My father, Victor Blackwood, was a federal judge whose reputation for fairness was matched only by his reputation for expecting nothing but excellence from his family. My mother, Constance, had been a successful corporate attorney before she married into the Blackwood legacy, and she never let anyone forget it. Together, they had created what appeared to be the perfect family unit, at least from the outside looking in. My brother Damien had followed their prescribed path flawlessly, graduating summa cum laude from Yale, attending Harvard Law School, and now working for one of the most prestigious firms in the country. He was everything they had hoped for in a child, while I had always been the family's greatest disappointment. The graduation ceremony earlier that afternoon had been a study in contrasts. While other families cheered and took photos as their children received their diplomas, my parents sat stone-faced in the audience as I walked across the stage to accept mine from Westfield Academy. There were no congratulations, no proud smiles, no celebratory dinner planned. Instead, they had rushed me home to help prepare for Damien's promotion party, as if my own graduation was nothing more than an inconvenient timing conflict with their real celebration. Westfield Academy was supposed to be my ticket to success, the same preparatory school that had launched Damien toward his Ivy League destiny. But where he had excelled in every aspect of academic and social life, I had struggled to find my place. My grades were solid but not spectacular, hovering around a B+ average that my parents considered barely acceptable. I participated in clubs and volunteer work, but never in leadership roles that would look impressive on college applications. Most damaging of all, I had failed to secure admission to any of the prestigious universities that the Blackwood family considered worthy of their legacy. The rejection letters had arrived throughout the spring like a series of small defeats. Yale, Princeton, Stanford, Columbia, and even my safety school choices had all declined to offer me admission. Each rejection felt like another confirmation of what my family had always suspected about me, that I simply didn't have what it took to carry on the Blackwood tradition of excellence. My parents had grown increasingly distant with each rejection letter, and by the time graduation approached, they had stopped asking about my college plans altogether. It was my guidance counselor, Mr. Thornfield, who had suggested I consider taking a gap year to reassess my goals and perhaps apply to community college in the meantime. He was a kind man in his 50s who had watched me struggle through 4 years of trying to live up to impossible expectations. During our final meeting, he had pulled me aside and told me something I would never forget. "Zara," he had said, his voice gentle but firm, "your worth isn't determined by which college accepts you or what your family expects of you. Sometimes the most successful people are the ones who take unconventional paths to get where they're going." Quote. His words had provided some comfort, but they did little to ease the crushing disappointment I felt every time I saw the look of shame in my parents' eyes. They had already begun telling their social circle that I would be taking time off to explore my options, which everyone understood to be code for she couldn't get into anywhere decent. The humiliation was compounded by the fact that many of my classmates had received full scholarships to top-tier universities, their achievements announced in the local newspaper and celebrated at school assemblies. The graduation party that evening had been planned months in advance, but it had morphed from a celebration of both children's accomplishments into a showcase for Damien's success. The guest list read like a who's who of Millbrook Heights society, including judges, attorneys, business leaders, and politicians who had come to congratulate my parents on raising such an exemplary son. I had been assigned the role of server, helping the catering staff ensure that glasses stayed full and appetizers circulated among the guests. As I moved through the crowd with a tray of champagne flutes, I overheard countless conversations about Damien's promising future, his impressive salary, and the important cases he would be working on at his new firm. Several family friends approached me with thinly veiled pity, asking about my plans in voices that suggested they already knew the answer would be disappointing. Aunt Beatrice, my mother's sister, had been particularly brutal in her assessment. "It's such a shame that talent doesn't always run in families," she had whispered loudly enough for several people to hear. "Some children are just born with limitations, I suppose." Uncle Sterling, never one to be outdone in cruelty, had added his own observation. "The girls had every advantage money can buy, and this is what we get. Perhaps it's time to lower expectations and accept that not everyone is destined for greatness." Their words stung, but they weren't saying anything I hadn't heard before. Throughout my childhood, I had been compared unfavorably to Damien at every turn. When he made the honor roll, they wondered why I couldn't do the same. When he was elected student body president, they questioned my leadership abilities. When he scored in the 99th percentile on standardized tests, they sent me to tutoring to figure out why I could only manage the 80th percentile. The constant comparisons had taken their toll on my self-esteem, but they had also instilled in me a fierce determination to prove myself worthy of the Blackwood name. Throughout high school, I had worked twice as hard as my classmates, staying up late to perfect assignments and spending weekends studying while others socialized. My teachers had noticed my dedication, and several had written glowing recommendation letters that praised my work ethic, creativity, and perseverance in the face of challenges. But none of that seemed to matter to my family. They were interested in results, not effort, and my results had consistently fallen short of their expectations. The community college acceptance letter that had arrived the previous week felt like the final nail in the coffin of their hopes for me. Riverside Community College was a perfectly respectable institution, but to the Blackwoods it represented failure and embarrassment. My best friend Indira had tried to console me when I called her in tears after receiving the acceptance letter. "Zara, there's nothing wrong with community college," she had insisted. "Some of the most successful people I know started there. It's not about where you begin, it's about where you finish." Indira's support meant everything to me, but it couldn't erase the deep sense of shame I felt every time I thought about explaining to people that I would be attending Riverside while my former classmates headed off to prestigious universities across the country. The social dynamics of Millbrook Heights were unforgiving, and I knew that my family's status would suffer from my perceived failure. As the evening progressed, the conversations became more pointed, and the criticism more direct. My mother, emboldened by several glasses of wine, had begun regaling guests with stories of Damien's childhood accomplishments, while conspicuously omitting any mention of mine. When someone asked about my plans, she would quickly change the subject or deflect with comments about how not everyone is cut out for academic excellence. Quote, "The breaking point came when my father stood to make a toast to Damien's success. The entire room fell silent as he raised his glass and began speaking about his pride in having a son who would carry on the family legacy of achievement. He spoke eloquently about Damien's character, his intelligence, and his bright future, drawing murmurs of approval from the assembled guests. Then, as if suddenly remembering that he had another child, he turned his attention to me. As for Zara," he said, his voice taking on a distinctly different tone, "well, we can't all be destined for greatness. Some people are simply meant to follow more modest paths in life. We've come to accept that she's bound to fail at anything requiring real ambition or intellectual rigor." The room erupted in uncomfortable laughter, and I felt my cheeks burn with humiliation. Several guests looked away awkwardly, while others nodded in agreement with his assessment. My mother smiled approvingly at his words, as if he had finally articulated something she had been thinking for years. Uncle Sterling raised his glass in a mock toast to my inevitable mediocrity, while Aunt Beatrice shook her head in exaggerated disappointment. It was at that precise moment, as I stood in the corner of the room with tears threatening to spill down my cheeks, that my phone rang. The Harvard University caller ID seemed to glow on the screen like a beacon of hope in the darkness of my family's rejection. My hands shook as I stared at it, afraid to answer but equally afraid to let it go to voicemail. Around me, the party continued, my family completely unaware that everything was about to change. The phone stopped ringing, then immediately started again. Harvard University. My heart pounded so hard I was sure people could hear it over the ambient noise of the party. This had to be a mistake, some kind of administrative error or cruel prank. I had never even applied to Harvard, convinced that it was so far beyond my reach.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
That attempting to gain admission would only result in another painful rejection. But as I stood there in my family's opulent ballroom, surrounded by people who had just witnessed my public humiliation, I realized that I had nothing left to lose. With trembling fingers, I pressed the answer button and lifted the phone to my ear, my voice barely a whisper as I said hello. Miss Blackwood? This is Dr. Castellano from Harvard University's Office of Admissions. I hope I'm not calling at an inconvenient time, but I have some rather extraordinary news to share with you. The world seemed to stop spinning as I processed his words. Harvard University was calling me with news, extraordinary news, and I was standing in a room full of people who had just been told that I was destined for failure. The irony was so perfect it almost seemed scripted, as if the universe had finally decided to intervene on my behalf after years of watching me struggle under the weight of my family's disappointment. "I'm sorry," I managed to say, my voice still barely audible. "Could you repeat that?" Dr. Castellano chuckled warmly. "Miss Blackwood, it's my tremendous pleasure to inform you that you've been selected to receive the Harvard Merit Scholarship, a full academic scholarship that covers tuition, room, board, and expenses for 4 years. We were so impressed by your application and supporting materials that the admissions committee voted unanimously to offer you this extraordinary opportunity." I felt the champagne glass slip from my other hand and shatter on the marble floor, the sound causing several nearby guests to turn and look at me with annoyance. But I barely noticed their disapproval because my mind was reeling from what I had just heard. Harvard Merit Scholarship. Full academic scholarship. Unanimous decision by the admissions committee. "I think there might be some mistake," I whispered into the phone, my voice shaking with disbelief. "I never applied to Harvard." Dr. Castellano's laughter was warm and reassuring through the phone. "There's no mistake, Miss Blackwood. Your guidance counselor, Mr. Thornfield, submitted your application along with what I can only describe as the most compelling recommendation letter I've read in my 23 years in admissions. He also included samples of your independent research work and your volunteer project documentation. The committee was unanimous in their decision that you represent exactly the kind of exceptional student we're looking for." The room around me seemed to fade into background noise as I processed his words. Mr. Thornfield had submitted an application on my behalf. The man who had watched me struggle through 4 years of academic pressure and family disappointment had seen something in me that I couldn't see in myself. While I had been drowning in rejection letters and self-doubt, he had been quietly advocating for my future. "Your research on sustainable urban development in low-income communities was particularly impressive," Dr. Castellano continued. "The way you combined economic analysis with social impact assessment showed a level of critical thinking that impressed our entire review board. And your volunteer work coordinating literacy programs in underserved neighborhoods demonstrated exactly the kind of leadership and social consciousness we value at Harvard." I could barely breathe as he spoke. The research project he was referring to had been something I had worked on during my junior year, a passion project that had grown out of my volunteer work at the Riverside Community Center. I had spent months interviewing residents, analyzing city planning documents, and developing proposals for affordable housing initiatives that could revitalize struggling neighborhoods without displacing existing communities. My family had dismissed it as a waste of time, questioning why I was spending my weekends in those parts of town when I should have been focusing on improving my standardized test scores. The volunteer literacy program had been equally personal to me. I had started tutoring elementary school children at the community center. After seeing how many bright kids were falling behind, simply because they didn't have access to the resources that families like mine took for granted. What had begun as a few hours a week had eventually grown into a comprehensive after-school program that served over 60 children. I had recruited other high school volunteers, secured donations of books and supplies, and developed a curriculum that helped struggling readers improve their skills while building confidence. But none of this work had ever been recognized or valued by my family. When I tried to share my excitement about a breakthrough with a particularly challenging student, my parents would change the subject back to Damien's academic achievements or upcoming opportunities. When I asked if they wanted to attend the literacy program's annual celebration, they would find excuses about prior commitments or social obligations. To them, my community work was evidence of misplaced priorities rather than meaningful accomplishment. The committee was also moved by your personal essay about overcoming adversity and finding your own path despite external pressures. Dr. Castellano added. Your honesty about struggling with family expectations while maintaining your commitment to service really resonated with our readers. We're looking for students who will contribute to our campus community in meaningful ways, and everything about your application suggested that you would be exactly that kind of student. I realized I was crying as he spoke, tears of disbelief and overwhelming gratitude streaming down my face. Around me, the graduation party continued with its celebration of Damien's success, my family and their guests completely oblivious to the conversation that was changing my entire future. The contrast was so stark it was almost surreal. Here I was, receiving news that would fundamentally alter the trajectory of my life, while standing in a room full of people who had just finished explaining why I was destined to fail. Miss Blackwood, are you still there? Dr. Castellano asked gently. Yes, I'm here, I managed to say, my voice thick with emotion. I'm just having trouble believing this is real. I understand completely. This kind of news can be overwhelming. The scholarship is quite comprehensive, covering not just tuition but also housing, meals, books, and even a stipend for personal expenses. We want to make sure that financial considerations don't prevent exceptional students from taking advantage of this opportunity. The magnitude of what he was describing began to sink in. A full scholarship to Harvard University meant that I wouldn't just be attending one of the world's most prestigious institutions, I would be doing so without placing any financial burden on my family. Not that they would have supported my education anyway, given their assumption that I was bound for community college, but the scholarship meant I would be completely independent in pursuing my dreams. When would I need to respond? I asked, trying to focus on practical details while my mind raced with possibilities. The scholarship committee would like to hear from you within the next week, but I should mention that we're also hoping you might be available for a brief interview this weekend. We're hosting a reception for scholarship recipients and their families on Saturday evening. It's an opportunity for you to meet other students and for us to officially welcome you to the Harvard community. The mention of families brought me crashing back to my current reality. I glanced around the ballroom at my relatives, who were still engaged in animated conversations about Damien's bright future and my own limitations. The thought of telling them about the Harvard scholarship felt both thrilling and terrifying. Part of me wanted to announce it immediately, to watch their expressions change, from condescension to shock to perhaps even respect. But another part of me was afraid they would find some way to diminish this achievement or convince me that I wasn't worthy of it. I would absolutely love to attend the reception, I said, surprised by the strength in my own voice. Should I bring anyone with me? The invitation extends to your immediate family, of course. We find that family support is crucial to student success, and we like to make sure everyone feels welcomed into the Harvard community. I almost laughed at the irony of his statement. Family support was exactly what I had been lacking throughout my academic journey. And the idea of my parents suddenly becoming supportive because of a Harvard acceptance seemed impossible to imagine. But perhaps this news would be significant enough to finally earn their respect and acknowledgement. After Dr. Castellano and I finished our conversation, I stood in the corner of the ballroom with my phone still pressed to my ear, even though the call had ended several minutes earlier. I was afraid that moving or speaking would somehow make the conversation disappear, revealing it to have been an elaborate daydream brought on by stress and humiliation. But the phone's call log clearly showed the 23-minute conversation with Harvard University admissions, confirming that everything I had heard was real. The scholarship represented more than just an educational opportunity. It was validation of everything I had worked for during 4 years of feeling inadequate and disappointing. All those late nights spent researching urban development policies, all those weekends spent tutoring kids at the community center, all those hours spent writing and rewriting essays about my experiences and aspirations had led to this moment. Mr. Thornfield had seen the value in my work when my own family couldn't, and his faith in me had opened doors I never imagined possible. I thought about the personal essay Dr. Castellano had mentioned, the one about overcoming adversity and finding my own path. I had written it during a particularly difficult period in my senior year, when the rejection letters were piling up and my parents' disappointment was becoming increasingly apparent. The essay had been cathartic to write, allowing me to articulate feelings I had never been able to express to my family. I had written about the pressure of living up to the Blackwood legacy, about feeling like a failure before I had even been given a chance to succeed, and about finding purpose and meaning through service to others. The essay had also explored my growing understanding that success couldn't be measured solely by traditional academic achievements or family approval. Through my work with the literacy program, I had learned that making a meaningful difference in someone's life was more fulfilling than any grade or test score. The children I tutored had taught me about resilience, creativity, and the power of encouragement. They had shown me that intelligence comes in many forms, and that everyone deserves the chance to reach their potential, regardless of their circumstances. Writing about these experiences had helped me realize that my supposed failures might actually be strengths in disguise. My struggles with meeting my family's expectations had given me empathy for others facing similar challenges. My experience as the disappointing child had made me more determined to help other people feel valued and supported. My journey through rejection and self-doubt had taught me to persevere in the face of adversity and to find motivation from within rather than relying on external validation. But standing in that ballroom, surrounded by family members who had just finished explaining my limitations to their social circle, I felt the familiar weight of their expectations and judgments. The Harvard scholarship was an incredible opportunity, but I knew my family would find ways to minimize its significance or question whether I truly deserved it. They had spent so many years defining me by my failures that accepting my success would require them to fundamentally reconsider their understanding of who I was and what I was capable of achieving. The conversation around me gradually began to wind down as guests started making their departures. Damien was accepting congratulations and business cards from potential clients and colleagues, while my parents basked in the reflected glory of his achievements. Several people approached me with perfunctory goodbyes, their polite smiles barely concealing their pity for the family disappointment who would be attending community college in the fall. Aunt Beatrice paused beside me as she prepared to leave, her expression a mixture of superiority and false sympathy. "Dear, I hope you know that we all have your best interests at heart when we express our concerns about your future. Sometimes the kindest thing family can do is help someone develop realistic expectations." Her words stung, but they also strengthened my resolve to prove everyone wrong. The Harvard scholarship wasn't just an educational opportunity, it was a chance to redefine myself and my place in the world. For the first time in years, I had concrete evidence that I was capable of exceptional achievement, that my worth wasn't determined by my family's assessment of my limitations. Uncle Sterling offered his own parting wisdom as he shook hands with my father. "Victor, you've done everything you could with that girl. Sometimes children just don't live up to their potential, despite having every advantage. At least you have Damien to carry on the family name with distinction." I watched my father nod in agreement, his expression one of resigned disappointment. Throughout my childhood, I had desperately wanted his approval and pride, but his response to Uncle Sterling's comment made me realize that his opinion of me was based on narrow definitions of success, rather than a genuine understanding of my character or capabilities. The Harvard scholarship proved that others could see value in my work and potential, even if my own family remained blind to it. As the last guests departed and the catering staff began cleaning up, I retreated to my room to process everything that had happened. The contrast between the evening's earlier humiliation and its surprising conclusion felt almost impossible to reconcile. In the span of a single phone call, I had gone from being publicly declared a failure to receiving one of the most prestigious academic scholarships in the country. I pulled out my laptop and began researching everything I could find about the Harvard Merit Scholarship. The program was highly competitive, with only a handful of recipients selected each year from thousands of exceptional applicants. Previous winners had gone on to become leaders in fields ranging from medicine and law to social justice and environmental science. Reading their profiles, I was amazed to discover that many of them had backgrounds similar to mine, having overcome family doubts, financial challenges, or academic struggles to achieve extraordinary success. The scholarship website included testimonials from current recipients, and their stories filled me with hope and excitement about the possibilities ahead. One student wrote about how the scholarship had allowed her to pursue research in renewable energy while working with communities affected by climate change. Another described how the program had supported his efforts to develop educational technology for students with learning disabilities. Their experiences suggested that Harvard wasn't just looking for students with perfect grades and test scores, but for individuals who could combine academic excellence with meaningful contributions to society. I spent hours reading about Harvard's campus, its academic programs, and the opportunities available to students. The university offered resources and support systems that would allow me to continue and expand my community work while pursuing rigorous academic study. There were research centers focused on urban development, social policy, and community engagement that aligned perfectly with my interests and goals. The prospect of learning from world-renowned faculty while collaborating with like-minded students was both thrilling and intimidating. As dawn approached, I finally closed my laptop and tried to get some sleep, but my mind was too active to rest. The Harvard scholarship represented everything I had hoped for, but never dared to expect. It was validation of my worth, vindication of my choices, and an opportunity to prove that my family's assessment of my potential had been fundamentally wrong. But beneath the excitement and gratitude, I also felt a deep sadness about the years I had spent believing my family's narrative about my limitations. How many opportunities had I not pursued because I had internalized their doubts about my capabilities? How many times had I settled for less than my best because I believed their predictions about my inevitable failure? The Harvard scholarship was wonderful, but it also highlighted the damage that had been done by years of conditional love and constant criticism. I thought about Mr. Thornfield's quiet faith in my abilities and his decision to submit my application without my knowledge. His action represented the kind of support and encouragement I had always craved from my family but had never received. He had seen potential in me that I couldn't see in myself, and his advocacy had literally changed the course of my life. The contrast between his belief in my capabilities and my family's assumption of my limitations couldn't have been more stark. The morning brought new challenges as I considered how to share the news about the scholarship. My family would undoubtedly be skeptical at first, possibly assuming that I was lying or exaggerating to make myself feel better about my failures. When they realized the news was legitimate, their responses would likely range from shocked disbelief to attempts to minimize the achievement or claim credit for my success, despite their lack of support. I decided to call Mr. Thornfield first, both to thank him for his incredible advocacy and to seek his advice about navigating my family's reactions. His phone rang several times before his familiar voice answered, warm and welcoming, even though it was barely 7 in the morning. "Zara, I was hoping you would call. Dr. Castellano contacted me yesterday evening to let me know about your scholarship. I couldn't be more thrilled or more proud of you." His genuine happiness and pride brought tears to my eyes once again. This man, who had no obligation to go above and beyond for any of his students, had invested his time and reputation in advocating for my future. His belief in me had opened doors that would have remained forever closed otherwise. "Mr. Thornfield, I don't even know how to begin thanking you," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "You submitted my application when I didn't even believe in myself enough to try. You saw something in me that I couldn't see, and you changed my entire life." Zara, you earned this scholarship through your own hard work, dedication, and character. I simply made sure that the right people had the opportunity to recognize what was already there. Your research, your volunteer work, your perseverance in the face of challenges, those accomplishments belong entirely to you. His words helped me begin to internalize the reality that I had earned this opportunity through my own efforts, rather than through luck or charity. The scholarship wasn't a gift or a mistake, it was recognition of work I had done and potential I possessed. That understanding would be crucial in the conversations ahead with my family. "Have you told your parents yet?" Mr. Thornfield asked gently. "Not yet. I'm not sure how they're going to react. They spent last night telling a room full of people that I'm bound to fail at anything requiring real ambition or intellectual rigor." Mr. Thornfield was quiet for a moment before responding. "Zara, I want you to remember something important. Your worth and your potential aren't determined by your family's opinions or expectations. You've just received one of the most prestigious academic scholarships in the world, which means that highly qualified people who don't even know you have recognized your exceptional abilities. Trust their judgment over the opinions of people who may be too close to the situation to see clearly." His advice gave me the courage I needed to face whatever reactions awaited me downstairs. The Harvard scholarship was real, it was earned, and it was mine, regardless of how my family chose to respond to the news. Their opinions couldn't diminish the achievement or take away the opportunities it represented. When I finally made my way to the kitchen for breakfast, I found my parents and Damien discussing his transition to the new law firm over coffee and pastries. They looked up as I entered, their expressions neutral but not particularly welcoming. The previous night's festivities had clearly left them in good spirits about Damien's prospects, while reinforcing their low expectations for mine. "Good morning," I said quietly, pouring myself a cup of coffee and joining them at the table. "Good morning, dear," my mother replied absently, her attention focused primarily on Damien's description of his new office and the high-profile cases he would be working on. I listened to their conversation for several minutes, waiting for an appropriate moment to share my news. Part of me wanted to interrupt dramatically and announce the scholarship immediately, but I also wanted to gauge their mood and approach the topic thoughtfully. The last thing I wanted was to have this incredible achievement dismissed or minimized because I had chosen the wrong moment or tone for the revelation. "By the way," my father said, glancing in my direction, "we've been thinking about your situation with community college. Perhaps it would be best if you took a part-time course load initially, given your academic track record. No sense in overwhelming yourself with a full schedule if you're not prepared for college-level work." His suggestion was both insulting and ironic, given that I was about to tell him I had been accepted to Harvard with a full scholarship. But his words also reinforced my understanding of how little my family thought of my capabilities, and how shocked they would be by the news I was about to share. "Actually," I said, setting down my coffee cup and taking a deep breath, "I have something important to tell you all. Yesterday evening, I received a phone call from Harvard University." The conversation stopped abruptly as all three of them turned to look at me with expressions ranging from confusion to skepticism. Damien was the first to speak, his tone suggesting that he thought I was either confused or lying. "Harvard? Why would Harvard be calling you? You didn't even apply there." "That's what I thought too," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady despite my nervousness. But it turns out that Mr. Thornfield submitted an application on my behalf, along with my research work and volunteer documentation. They called to offer me the Harvard Merit Scholarship, a full academic scholarship covering tuition, room, board, and expenses for 4 years. The silence that followed my announcement was deafening. My parents stared at me as if I had just claimed to have been contacted by aliens, while Damien's expression shifted from skepticism to something approaching concern for my mental health. "Zara," my mother said slowly, "that's quite a story, but Harvard doesn't just call people out of the blue with scholarship offers. Perhaps you misunderstood what the caller was saying, or maybe someone was playing a prank on you." Her dismissive tones sparked a familiar feeling of frustration, but this time I had concrete evidence to support my claims. I pulled out my phone and showed them the call log, the 23-minute conversation with Harvard University admissions clearly displayed on the screen. The caller was Dr. Castellano from the Office of Admissions. I continued, my confidence growing as I provided specific details. He specifically mentioned my research on sustainable urban development and my volunteer work with the literacy program. The scholarship committee voted unanimously to offer me this opportunity. And they've invited me to a reception this Saturday evening for scholarship recipients and their families. My father examined my phone with the careful attention he typically reserved for legal documents, checking the number, the duration of the call, and the timestamp. His expression gradually shifted from skepticism to bewilderment, as he confirmed that the call had indeed come from Harvard University. "This is impossible," he said finally. Harvard Merit Scholarships are extraordinarily competitive. They're awarded to the most exceptional students in the country. If this were legitimate, we would have known about your application months ago. Mr. Thornfield submitted everything without telling me because he knew I wouldn't believe I had a chance, I explained. He included my independent research, my volunteer work documentation, and a recommendation letter. Dr. Castellano said it was the most compelling application he had read in 23 years in admissions. Damien leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful as he processed this information. Unlike our parents, he seemed to be taking my claims seriously, perhaps because he understood the admissions process at elite universities better than they did. "If this is real," he said slowly, "it would be an incredible achievement. Harvard Merit Scholarships are beyond prestigious. They're reserved for students who show exceptional promise for making significant contributions to society." His acknowledgement of the scholarship's significance felt like the first glimmer of recognition I had received from my family in years. But even as he spoke, I could see our parents struggling to reconcile this news with their long-held assumptions about my capabilities and potential. The kitchen fell silent again as they grappled with the implications of what I had told them. Everything they had believed about my academic abilities, my work ethic, and my prospects for success was being challenged by this single phone call. The daughter they had publicly declared bound for failure had just received one of the most prestigious academic honors in the world. I waited for their response, knowing that this moment would define not just how they viewed my achievement, but how our family relationships would evolve going forward. The Harvard Scholarship had already changed my life, but their reaction would determine whether it also changed theirs. My mother's face had turned several shades paler as she processed the reality of my announcement. She set down her coffee cup with trembling hands and stared at me as if seeing a stranger rather than her own daughter. The woman who had spent years explaining my limitations to anyone who would listen was suddenly confronted with evidence that contradicted everything she believed about my capabilities. "There must be some kind of administrative error," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "These scholarships go to valedictorians, to students with perfect SAT scores, to children who have been groomed for Ivy League success since kindergarten. They don't go to students with B+ averages who couldn't even get into their safety schools." Her words revealed the depth of her misconceptions about both my abilities and the scholarship selection process. She was operating under the assumption that academic achievement could be measured solely by grades and standardized test scores, completely ignoring the research work, community service, and leadership experiences that had actually caught Harvard's attention. "Mom," I said gently, "the scholarship isn't just about grades. Dr. Castellano specifically mentioned that they were looking for students who could combine academic excellence with meaningful contributions to society. My research on urban development and my work with the literacy program demonstrated exactly the kind of impact they want their scholars to make." But even as I explained the selection criteria, I could see that my mother was struggling to accept this new reality. For so many years, she had defined herself as the mother of one exceptional child and one disappointment. Acknowledging my success would require her to fundamentally reconsider not just her assessment of my abilities, but also her own identity as a parent. My father had been unusually quiet throughout this exchange, his legal mind clearly working through the implications of what I had told them. Finally, he looked up from my phone and spoke with the measured tone he typically reserved for court proceedings. "If this scholarship offer is legitimate, and I'm not saying it is, but if it is, then we need to understand exactly what we're dealing with. Harvard doesn't make these kinds of offers lightly. There would be extensive verification processes, background checks, and academic reviews. The university's reputation depends on the quality of their scholarship recipients." His response was characteristically analytical, but I detected something else in his voice that I had rarely heard before: a grudging respect for the achievement I was claiming. Judge Victor Blackwood understood prestige and institutional credibility better than most people, and he knew that Harvard University didn't make mistakes when it came to their most prestigious scholarships. Damien had been researching the Harvard Merit Scholarship on his phone while we talked, and his findings were only adding to the family's shock. According to their website, they only award these scholarships to 12 students per year from the entire country, he said, his voice filled with disbelief. The selection committee includes Nobel Prize winners, Fortune 500 CEOs, and former government officials. If Zara actually received this scholarship, it means some of the most accomplished people in America believe she has extraordinary potential. The weight of his words settled over the kitchen like a heavy blanket. 12 students per year from the entire country. A selection committee of the nation's most accomplished individuals. Unanimous approval from people who had never met me but had been impressed enough by my work to offer me one of the most prestigious academic honors available. But rather than celebrating this incredible achievement, my family seemed to be entering a state of collective denial. They had spent so many years crafting a narrative about my limitations that accepting my success felt like admitting they had been fundamentally wrong about who I was and what I was capable of achieving. "There has to be more to this story," my mother insisted, her voice taking on a desperate edge. "People don't just receive scholarships to Harvard without years of preparation and strategic planning. We would have known if you were working towards something like this. We would have been involved in the process." Her assumption that she would have been involved in any significant achievement of mine revealed how little she understood about my inner life and motivations. For years, I had stopped sharing my goals and dreams with my family because their responses ranged from indifference to active discouragement. The research project that had impressed Harvard so much had been something I had worked on quietly, without seeking their approval or support, because I knew they would question why I was wasting time on activities that didn't directly improve my college prospects. "You weren't involved because you never showed any interest in the work I was doing," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady despite the emotion I was feeling. "When I told you about my research on sustainable urban development, you changed the subject. When I invited you to the literacy program's annual celebration, you found excuses not to attend. When I tried to discuss my volunteer work, you suggested I should be focusing on standardized test prep instead." The truth of my words hung in the air between us, creating an uncomfortable silence that none of them seemed eager to break. They were being forced to confront the reality that their lack of interest in my activities had prevented them from recognizing work that Harvard University considered exceptional. My father cleared his throat and attempted to regain control of the conversation. "Regardless of what may or may not have happened in the past, we need to verify this scholarship offer before making any assumptions. I'll contact Harvard's admissions office directly to confirm the details." His suggestion was both practical and insulting, implying that he still believed there was a significant chance that I was either lying or mistaken about the scholarship. But I welcomed his verification because I knew that speaking directly with Dr. Castellano would only confirm everything I had told them. "That's fine," I said calmly. Dr. Castellano specifically mentioned that he expected families would want to verify the offer. He said that parents often need time to process news this significant, especially when it comes as a surprise. The fact that the admissions officer had anticipated their skepticism seemed to catch my parents off guard. It suggested that their reaction was not unusual, that other families had struggled to believe that their children could achieve something so extraordinary without their knowledge or involvement. As my father made notes about contacting Harvard, Damien continued reading about the scholarship program on his phone. His expression grew increasingly thoughtful as he learned more about the selection criteria and the backgrounds of previous recipients. "This is actually starting to make sense," he said slowly. "According to the program description, they specifically look for students who have demonstrated leadership in addressing social challenges, who have shown innovative thinking in their academic work, and who have the potential to become leaders in fields that serve the public good." Zara's urban development research and her literacy program work would fit perfectly with those criteria. His acknowledgement of the connection between my work and the scholarship requirements felt like a small victory, but it also highlighted how little my family had understood about the significance of my activities. They had viewed my research as an academic distraction and my volunteer work as a waste of time, never recognizing that these experiences were preparing me for exactly the kind of opportunities that elite universities value most. But why didn't Mr. Thornfield tell us he was submitting an application? My mother asked, still struggling to accept the situation. Surely he should have consulted with us before taking such a significant step. Because he knew you would discourage me from applying, I replied honestly. He watched me struggle with your expectations for 4 years, and he saw how your lack of confidence in my abilities was affecting my own self-perception. He submitted the application because he believed I deserved the opportunity to be evaluated on my own merits, without the filter of family doubt. My words clearly stung, but they were also undeniably true. Mr. Thornfield had protected me from my family's limiting beliefs by bypassing them entirely, allowing my work to speak for itself without the interference of their skepticism and criticism. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of our housekeeper, Mrs. Rodriguez, who had worked for our family for over a decade. She noticed the tension in the room immediately and hesitated in the doorway, unsure whether to proceed with her usual morning routines. "Please come in, Mrs. Rodriguez," I said warmly. "I was just telling my family about some exciting news. I received a full scholarship to Harvard University yesterday evening." Her face lit up with genuine joy and pride, a stark contrast to my family's stunned bewilderment. "Oh, Miss Zara, that's wonderful news. I always knew you were special, with all that studying and helping those children with their reading. Harvard University, your abuela would be so proud." Her immediate acceptance and celebration of my achievement highlighted the difference between conditional and unconditional support. Mrs. Rodriguez had observed my work habits and volunteer activities over the years, and she had no trouble believing that they could lead to extraordinary opportunities. Her response was everything I had hoped for from my family but had never received. "Thank you, Mrs. Rodriguez," I said, tears threatening once again. "Your support has always meant so much to me." After she left to begin her work in other parts of the house, the kitchen fell silent again. My family seemed to be grappling with the implications of what they had witnessed. Their housekeeper had immediately recognized and celebrated an achievement that they were still struggling to accept as real. "I think," my father said finally, "we should postpone any further discussion until I've had a chance to speak with Harvard directly. There are too many questions that need to be answered before we can properly evaluate this situation." His legalistic approach to what should have been a moment of family celebration felt like yet another rejection. But I had learned not to expect emotional support from parents who had never provided it before. The Harvard scholarship was real, regardless of whether they chose to acknowledge it immediately, and their verification process would only confirm what I already knew to be true. "The reception Dr. Castellano mentioned is this Saturday evening," I said, gathering my dishes to leave the table. "He invited the entire family to attend, so you'll have the opportunity to meet other scholarship recipients and their families. I think that might help you understand what this achievement actually means." As I prepared to leave the kitchen, Damien called after me. "Zara, wait a minute. Regardless of how Mom and Dad are processing this news, I want you to know that if this scholarship is real, it's an incredible accomplishment. Harvard Merit Scholarships are legendary in academic circles. The fact that you earned one means you're operating at a level that most people never reach." His words were the closest thing to family support I had received since the phone call, and they meant more to me than he could possibly understand. For my entire life, Damien had been held up as the standard of excellence that I could never meet. Hearing him acknowledge my achievement with genuine respect felt like a fundamental shift in our sibling dynamic. "Thank you," I said simply. "That means a lot coming from you." But even as I appreciated Damien's recognition, I was acutely aware that my parents remained skeptical and defensive. Their inability to celebrate my success revealed the depth of their investment in their narrative about my limitations. Accepting that I had earned one of the most prestigious academic honors in the country would require them to acknowledge that they had been wrong about me for years, and that acknowledgement seemed to be more difficult than I had anticipated. I spent the rest of the morning in my room, researching Harvard's academic programs and trying to process the emotional whiplash of the past 18 hours. The contrast between my family's reaction and Mrs. Rodriguez's immediate joy was stark and telling. The people who knew me best should have been the most excited about my success, but instead, they were the most resistant to believing it was possible. Around noon, I received a text message from Indira asking how the graduation party had gone. Her timing was perfect, and I called her immediately to share the incredible news about the scholarship. Her reaction was everything I had hoped for from my family. "Zara! Oh my God! Harvard University! I can't believe it! I mean, I can believe it because you're amazing, but I can't believe it actually happened. This is incredible. When do you start? What will you study? I'm so proud of you I could cry." Her enthusiasm and genuine excitement were exactly what I needed after the morning's difficult conversation with my family. Indira had been my closest friend throughout high school, and she had witnessed both my struggles with family expectations and my dedication to my research and volunteer work. Her immediate acceptance of my achievement felt like validation that the people who truly knew me weren't surprised by my success. "The crazy part is that I never even applied," I explained. "Mr. Thornfield submitted everything without telling me because he knew I wouldn't believe I had a chance." "That man is a saint," Indira replied. "He saw what your family couldn't see, what you couldn't even see in yourself. Your research work was incredible, Zara. I remember you staying up until 3 in the morning analyzing housing policies and interviewing community members. And your literacy program has helped so many kids learn to love reading. Of course Harvard would want you." Her perspective helped me begin to internalize the reality that I had earned this opportunity through my own efforts and dedication. The scholarship wasn't a lucky accident or a case of mistaken identity. It was recognition of work I had done and potential I possessed. "How did your family react when you told them?" Indira asked. "About as well as you'd expect," I replied with a bitter laugh. "They're convinced there's been some kind of mistake. My father is planning to call Harvard to verify the offer because he can't believe it's real." "That's awful, Zara. This should be the happiest day of your life, and they're making you feel like you have to prove you deserve it." Her words captured exactly what I was feeling. The scholarship should have been cause for celebration, but instead I found myself in the familiar position of having to defend and justify my achievements to people who should have been my biggest supporters. "The thing is," I continued, "part of me understands their shock. I've spent so many years believing their assessment of my abilities that even I have trouble accepting that I could accomplish something this significant. If my own family thinks I'm destined for failure, maybe I started believing it too." "Stop right there," Indira said firmly. "Your family's opinion of you doesn't define your worth or your potential. Harvard University, one of the most prestigious institutions in the world, has recognized your exceptional abilities. Trust their judgment over the opinions of people who have been too critical to see clearly." Her advice echoed what Mr. Thornfield had told me that morning, and I was beginning to understand that multiple objective observers could see strengths in me that my family had consistently overlooked or dismissed. We talked for another hour about the implications of the scholarship, the opportunities it would provide, and the vindication it represented after years of feeling inadequate. By the time we ended the call, I felt stronger and more confident about facing whatever reactions awaited me from my family. That afternoon, I heard my father's voice from his home office as he made what I assumed was his verification call to Harvard. The conversation lasted nearly an hour, and I could tell from his tone that he was asking detailed questions about the scholarship program, the selection process, and my specific application materials. When he finally emerged from his office, his expression was one of stunned bewilderment. I spoke with Dr. Castellano directly. He announced to my mother and Damien, who had been waiting anxiously for the results of his investigation. "The scholarship offer is legitimate. Zara has been selected to receive the Harvard Merit Scholarship based on what Dr. Castellano described as one of the most impressive applications they've reviewed in recent years." The confirmation of my achievement seemed to hit my mother like a physical blow. She sat down heavily in the nearest chair and stared at the wall, as if trying to reconcile this new information with everything she had believed about me for the past 18 years. He specifically mentioned her research on sustainable urban development. My father continued, his voice taking on the mechanical tone he used when reciting facts he found difficult to process. Apparently, her analysis of housing policies and community impact assessments demonstrated graduate-level critical thinking skills. He also praised her volunteer work, saying that her literacy program showed exactly the kind of leadership and social consciousness they look for in scholarship recipients. Each detail he recounted felt like another small vindication of choices my family had never understood or supported. The research they had dismissed as a waste of time was being praised by Harvard as graduate-level work. The volunteer activities they had viewed as distractions from my studies were being recognized as evidence of leadership and character. Dr. Castellano also mentioned that Mr. Thornfield's recommendation letter was extraordinary, my father added. He said it painted a picture of a student who had overcome significant challenges while maintaining her commitment to serving others. The admissions committee was apparently moved by the contrast between her academic potential and the lack of support she had received at home. The last sentence hung in the air like an accusation, and I watched my parents struggle with the implication that their lack of support had been noted and documented by my guidance counselor. The very teacher who had advocated for my success had also identified their criticism and skepticism as obstacles I had overcome rather than motivation I had received. The reception this Saturday is mandatory for scholarship recipients, my father concluded. Dr. Castellano expects Zara to attend, along with any family members who want to be involved in welcoming her to the Harvard community. The word mandatory seemed to crystallize the reality of the situation for all of them. This wasn't a tentative offer that could be dismissed or explained away. It was an accomplished fact that required their participation and acknowledgement. My mother finally spoke, her voice barely audible. I don't understand how this happened. We've been involved in every aspect of your education since kindergarten. We hired tutors, enrolled you in test prep courses, monitored your grades, pushed you to work harder. How could you accomplish something this significant without our knowledge? Her question revealed the fundamental misunderstanding that had defined our relationship throughout my academic career. She had confused surveillance with support, control with encouragement. All of her involvement in my education had been focused on correcting my perceived deficiencies rather than nurturing my existing strengths. Mom, I said gently, you were involved in trying to make me into the student you thought I should be. But you never paid attention to the student I actually was. You wanted me to be like Damien, but I'm not Damien. I'm someone different, with different strengths, and different ways of achieving success. My words seemed to penetrate her defensive confusion, and for the first time in years, I saw a flicker of recognition in her eyes. She was beginning to understand that her efforts to reshape me into her vision of an ideal student had prevented her from seeing and supporting the person I actually was. The literacy program, she said slowly. You tried to tell us about it, didn't you? And the research project. You wanted to share those things with us. I tried, I confirmed, but you always redirected the conversation back to my test scores or my grades, or why I wasn't more like Damien. Eventually, I stopped trying to share my interests with you because it was clear you weren't interested in anything that didn't fit your definition of academic success. The kitchen fell silent as my family absorbed the implications of what I had said. They were being forced to confront the possibility that their parenting approach had not only failed to motivate me toward their definition of success, but had actually prevented them from recognizing the success I was achieving on my own terms. Damien was the first to break the silence. Zara, I owe you an apology. I've been so focused on my own achievements that I never paid attention to what you were accomplishing. I should have been a better brother, a better supporter of your goals and interests. His apology was unexpected and deeply meaningful. For so many years, I had felt invisible in the shadow of his accomplishments. But his acknowledgement suggested that our relationship could evolve beyond the dynamic of successful sibling and disappointing sibling that had defined our childhood. Thank you, I said. That means more to me than you know. But even as Damien offered his apology and support, my parents remained silent and withdrawn. The confirmation of my scholarship had shattered their understanding of who I was and what I was capable of achieving. But they seemed unable or unwilling to acknowledge their role in underestimating and unsupporting me throughout my academic journey. The rest of the afternoon passed in an uncomfortable state of suspended animation. My family moved through their usual routines, but the Harvard scholarship hung over everything like a revelation that no one quite knew how to process. I retreated to my room to continue researching my future university and to escape the awkward tension that had settled over our house. As evening approached, I realized that regardless of how my family chose to respond to my achievement, my life had fundamentally changed. The scholarship represented freedom from their expectations, validation of my worth, and opportunities that I had never dared to imagine. Whether they celebrated my success or continued to struggle with accepting it, I was moving forward toward a future that I had earned through my own efforts and dedication. The Harvard Merit Scholarship was mine, and nothing my family said or did could diminish its significance or take away the doors it had opened for me. Saturday evening arrived with the weight of expectation and apprehension that had been building since my father's confirmation call with Harvard. The reception was being held at the Metropolitan Club downtown, an exclusive venue that perfectly matched the prestige of the scholarship program. As I stood in front of my bedroom mirror, adjusting the navy blue dress my mother had reluctantly purchased for the occasion, I felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness that was unlike anything I had experienced before. The past few days had been a whirlwind of preparation and emotional processing. My mother had thrown herself into researching appropriate attire and etiquette for Harvard events, as if her sudden attention to these details could somehow compensate for years of dismissing my achievements. She had insisted on taking me shopping for what she called proper university reception clothing, though her motivations seemed more about maintaining family appearances than celebrating my success. "We need to make sure you look the part," she had said while examining expensive dresses at Nordstrom. "If you're going to be representing the Blackwood family at Harvard events, you need to understand the importance of making the right impression." Her comment had stung because it revealed that even in this moment of triumph, she was more concerned about how my achievement reflected on the family reputation than about acknowledging what I had accomplished. But I had chosen not to argue, recognizing that her involvement in preparing for the reception was the closest thing to support I was likely to receive from her. My father had taken a different approach to processing the news, diving into research about Harvard's academic programs and the career trajectories of previous merit scholarship recipients. His legal training had kicked in, and he was treating my acceptance like a case that required thorough investigation and strategic planning. While his analytical approach lacked warmth, it did demonstrate a grudging respect for the opportunity I had been given. "The scholarship opens doors that money can't buy," he had told me during one of our conversations. "The networking opportunities alone will be invaluable for your future career prospects. You need to understand that this isn't just about getting a free education, it's about joining an elite community of scholars and leaders." His words carried the implication that I should be grateful for his advice about making the most of an opportunity I had earned without his help, but I tried to focus on the positive aspects of his newfound interest in my academic future. Damien had been the most genuinely supportive member of my family, taking time to share stories about his own experiences at elite universities and offering practical advice about navigating the social dynamics of prestigious academic institutions. His transformation from dismissive older brother to encouraging mentor had been one of the unexpected benefits of the scholarship revelation. "The imposter syndrome is real," he had warned me. "You're going to be surrounded by incredibly accomplished people, and it's easy to start questioning whether you belong there. But remember that Harvard chose you for a reason. They saw something special in your work, and they believe you have the potential to make significant contributions to society." His insights had been valuable, but they had also highlighted the isolation I felt within my own family. The person who understood my situation best was the brother who had spent years overshadowing my achievements, while my parents remained emotionally distant despite their practical support for the reception attendants. As our car pulled up to the Metropolitan Club, I could feel the tension radiating from my family. My father straightened his tie for the third time, my mother checked her appearance in her compact mirror, and Damien adjusted his cufflinks with the nervous energy of someone attending his first job interview. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was the one being honored, yet I was the calmest person in the car. The club's interior was everything I had expected, from an exclusive venue catering to the city's elite. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over mahogany-paneled walls lined with portraits of distinguished members, while oriental rugs muffled the sound of conversations taking place in various seating areas. The reception was being held in the club's main ballroom, where round tables covered in white linens had been arranged around a small stage at the front of the room. Dr. Castellano greeted us near the entrance, his warm smile immediately putting me at ease despite the formal setting. He was a distinguished man in his 60s with gray hair and kind eyes that suggested both intelligence and genuine interest in the students he worked with. His handshake was firm and confident as he welcomed me to what he called the Harvard family. "Miss Blackwood, it's wonderful to finally meet you in person," he said. "I've been looking forward to this conversation since our phone call earlier this week. Your application materials made quite an impression on our selection committee." He turned to address my family with the practiced charm of someone accustomed to working with parents who were struggling to process their children's exceptional achievements. "Mr. and Mrs. Blackwood, Damien, thank you for joining us this evening. Family support is crucial to student success, and we're delighted to welcome all of you into the Harvard community." My parents managed polite responses, though I could tell they were still grappling with the reality of the situation. Being addressed as members of the Harvard community by an admissions officer was forcing them to confront the legitimacy of my achievement in a way that no amount of private verification could accomplish. Dr. Castellano guided us toward a registration table where other scholarship recipients and their families were checking in. The diversity of the group was immediately apparent, representing different geographic regions, ethnic backgrounds, and socioeconomic circumstances. What united them was an air of quiet confidence and intellectual curiosity that I recognized from my most engaged classmates at Westfield Academy. "Let me introduce you to some of your fellow scholars," Dr. Castellano said, leading us toward a young woman standing with what appeared to be her grandparents. "Zara, I'd like you to meet Elena Rodriguez. Elena will be studying environmental engineering with a focus on sustainable water systems in developing countries." Elena's warm smile and firm handshake immediately put me at ease. She was clearly nervous but excited, and her grandparents beamed with pride as Dr. Castellano described her research on water purification technologies. The contrast between their unconditional support and my family's continued bewilderment was striking. "It's wonderful to meet you, Zara," Elena said. "Dr. Castellano mentioned your work on urban development. I'd love to hear more about your research on housing policies and community impact." Her genuine interest in my work was refreshing after days of family skepticism, and we quickly fell into an animated discussion about the intersection of environmental justice and affordable housing. As we talked, I noticed my parents watching from a few feet away, their expressions suggesting that they were seeing a side of me they had never fully recognized or appreciated. Dr. Castellano continued introducing me to other scholarship recipients throughout the evening. There was Marcus Chen, whose research on educational technology had caught Harvard's attention after he developed learning software that helped students with dyslexia improve their reading comprehension. His parents, both immigrants who worked multiple jobs to support their family's educational goals, glowed with pride as they described his achievements. Then I met Sarah Williams, whose advocacy work for juvenile justice reform had led to policy changes in 3 states before she had even graduated from high school. Her single mother spoke eloquently about Sarah's dedication to helping other young people navigate the legal system, and the love and support between them was palpable. Each introduction revealed the same pattern: exceptional young people who had identified important social problems and developed innovative approaches to addressing them, supported by families who recognized and celebrated their unique contributions. The scholarship recipients shared a common thread of using their academic abilities to serve others, but their family dynamics varied dramatically. As the formal program began, Dr. Castellano took the stage to address the assembled group. His remarks about the selection process and the qualities that distinguished Merit Scholarship recipients provided context that helped my family understand the significance of my achievement. "The Harvard Merit Scholarship represents more than academic excellence," he explained. "We're looking for students who have demonstrated the ability to identify complex social challenges and develop thoughtful, innovative approaches to addressing them. These young scholars have shown that they can combine rigorous intellectual work with meaningful service to their communities." He went on to describe the selection process in detail, explaining that applications were reviewed by multiple committees composed of faculty members, alumni leaders, and community advocates. The unanimous approval required for scholarship offers meant that every recipient had impressed evaluators from diverse backgrounds and perspectives. The 12 students we're honoring tonight were chosen from over 3,000 applicants, Dr. Castellano continued. Each of them has demonstrated not just the academic ability to succeed at Harvard, but the character and vision to become leaders who will make lasting contributions to society. The statistics he shared seemed to have a profound impact on my parents. 3,000 applicants for 12 scholarships represented competition far more intense than anything they had previously understood. The realization that I had not only been selected from this pool but had impressed evaluators unanimously was forcing them to reconsider everything they thought they knew about my capabilities. During the dinner portion of the evening, we were seated at a table with 2 other scholarship families. The conversations that developed over the course of the meal provided my parents with additional perspective on the achievement I represented and the community I was joining. The father of one scholarship recipient was a Harvard alumnus who served on the university's board of advisors. His insights into the scholarship program's history and prestige seemed to particularly resonate with my father, who appreciated hearing from someone who understood both the institutional culture and the career implications of merit scholarship selection. These scholarships are legendary among Harvard alumni, the board member explained. Merit scholarship recipients consistently become leaders in their fields, whether that's academic research, public service, business innovation, or social advocacy. The university tracks their career trajectories carefully because they represent some of our most successful graduates. He went on to share stories of previous recipients who had become federal judges, Fortune 500 CEOs, Nobel Prize winners, and leaders of major nonprofit organizations. The pattern of exceptional achievement among scholarship alumni provided context for understanding the potential trajectory of my own future. The scholarship doesn't just pay for education, he continued. It provides access to a network of mentors, collaborators, and supporters that will benefit these students throughout their careers. Harvard takes care of its merit scholars because they know these young people will go on to make extraordinary contributions to society. His comments seemed to finally penetrate my mother's defenses. For the first time since learning about the scholarship, she began asking questions about my research and volunteer work, as if suddenly recognizing that these activities might be more significant than she had previously understood. "Tell me more about your literacy program," she said during a lull in the broader table conversation. "How did you develop the curriculum? And what kind of impact have you seen with the children you've worked with?" Her question caught me off guard because it represented the first time she had ever asked for detailed information about my volunteer work. For years, she had dismissed my community service as a distraction from academics, but hearing other parents discuss their children's social impact projects seemed to have shifted her perspective. I spent several minutes describing the program's evolution from individual tutoring sessions to a comprehensive after-school initiative serving 60 children. I explained how I had recruited other high school volunteers, secured funding from local businesses, and developed reading strategies that helped struggling students build both skills and confidence. As I talked, I watched my mother's expression change from polite interest to genuine engagement. She began asking follow-up questions about program administration, volunteer training, and outcome measurement that demonstrated she was finally recognizing the complexity and significance of what I had accomplished. "You developed all of this on your own?" she asked, her voice reflecting a mixture of surprise and admiration that I had rarely heard from her before. "I had support from the community center staff and some guidance from my English teachers," I replied. "But yes, the program design and implementation were primarily my responsibility. It started because I saw a need and wanted to help address it." Her questions continued throughout the evening, and I could see her gradually reconstructing her understanding of my capabilities and achievements. The work she had dismissed as hobby-level volunteering was being reframed as evidence of leadership, innovation, and social impact that had impressed one of the world's most prestigious universities. My father was having his own revelations through conversations with other parents about their children's research projects. Hearing about high school students conducting graduate-level analysis in fields ranging from biomedical engineering to international relations was helping him understand that exceptional achievement among teenagers was more common than he had realized, but also more impressive than he had given me credit for. "Your urban development research," he said during a quiet moment between formal program activities. Dr. Castellano mentioned that it demonstrated graduate-level critical thinking. "Can you explain what that means in practical terms?" His question represented a significant shift from his earlier skepticism about the scholarship to genuine curiosity about the work that had earned it. I spent time describing my methodology for analyzing housing policies, my interviews with community members affected by development decisions, and my proposals for alternative approaches that could address housing needs without displacing existing residents. "You conducted primary research involving interviews with residents?" he asked, his legal training recognizing the complexity of gathering and analyzing first-hand testimony. "Over 40 interviews across 3 different neighborhoods," I confirmed. I wanted to understand how development decisions affected people's daily lives, not just examine the policies on paper. The human impact data was crucial for developing alternatives that would actually serve community needs. His expression suggested that he was beginning to understand why Harvard had been impressed by my research. As a federal judge, he appreciated the importance of considering multiple perspectives and gathering comprehensive evidence before making decisions that affected people's lives. My approach to urban development analysis reflected many of the same principles he applied in his judicial work. The evening's program concluded with brief presentations from each scholarship recipient about their research interests and career goals. When my turn came to speak, I felt a confidence that had been building throughout the evening, as I recognized that I truly belonged among this exceptional group of students. My research focuses on sustainable urban development that serves existing communities rather than displacing them. I began, my voice strong and clear despite my nervousness. Too often, development projects are designed without meaningful input from the people who will be most affected by them. My goal is to develop planning approaches that combine economic development with social justice, creating opportunities for growth that benefit everyone in a community. I continued by describing my literacy program and my plans to expand educational access in underserved areas. The response from the audience was warmly supportive, and I could see other scholarship recipients nodding in recognition of shared values and similar commitments to service. But the most meaningful response came from my family. As I spoke about my research and volunteer work, I watched their faces transform, from polite attention to genuine pride and admiration. For the first time in my life, they were seeing me as I truly was, rather than as a disappointing version of what they thought I should be. When the formal program ended and we began making our way toward the exit, Dr. Castellano pulled me aside for a final conversation. "Zara, I want you to know how impressed we were not just with your academic work, but with your maturity and vision for making a positive impact on society," he said. "Students like you are exactly why the Merit Scholarship Program exists. You represent the future of thoughtful, engaged leadership that our world desperately needs." His words provided validation that went beyond family approval or social recognition. Harvard University, through Dr. Castellano, was confirming that my work had value and that my goals were worthwhile. The scholarship wasn't charity or luck, it was recognition of potential that I had demonstrated through years of dedicated effort. As we drove home from the reception, the atmosphere in our car was markedly different from the tension that had characterized the drive there. My parents were processing what they had experienced, and their comments suggested that they were beginning to understand both the significance of my achievement and their own role in failing to recognize it earlier. The other families seemed so supportive of their children's interests, my mother observed quietly. "I realized tonight that we've never really asked you about your goals, or tried to understand what motivated your volunteer work." Her comment represented the closest thing to an acknowledgement of responsibility that I had heard from either parent. It wasn't a full apology, but it suggested that the evening had prompted some self-reflection about their approach to parenting and their assumptions about my capabilities. "The research presentations were impressive," my father added. "I had no idea that high school students were capable of conducting such sophisticated analysis. Your work on urban development was clearly as rigorous as anything I've seen from graduate students." His professional assessment of my research carried more weight than generic praise, because it came from his expertise as someone who regularly evaluated complex arguments and evidence. Hearing him compare my work favorably to graduate-level analysis helped me internalize the reality that my achievements were genuinely exceptional rather than accidentally successful. Damien, who had been largely quiet during the drive, finally spoke as we pulled into our driveway. "Zara, I owe you more than just an apology. I've been so focused on my own achievements that I never paid attention to what you were accomplishing. Tonight showed me that you've been doing incredible work for years, and I was too self-centered to notice." His words touched me deeply because they represented genuine recognition from someone whose approval I had sought throughout my childhood. But more importantly, they suggested that our sibling relationship could evolve beyond the competitive dynamic that had characterized our upbringing. "Thank you," I said simply. "That means a lot to me." As I prepared for bed that night, I reflected on how much had changed in just 1 week. The Harvard scholarship had transformed not just my future prospects, but also my family's understanding of who I was and what I was capable of achieving. The reception had forced them to confront the reality that their assumptions about my limitations had been fundamentally wrong, and that recognition was opening the door to relationships based on mutual respect rather than disappointment and criticism. But beyond the family dynamics, the evening had also provided me with a glimpse of the community I would be joining at Harvard. The other scholarship recipients were exceptional individuals who shared my commitment to using their abilities to serve others, and their diverse backgrounds and research interests suggested that I would be challenged and inspired by my future classmates. The transformation in my parents' attitude was perhaps the most surprising outcome of the evening. Seeing me in the context of other high-achieving students and hearing from Harvard officials about the significance of the scholarship had forced them to reconsider everything they thought they knew about my potential. Their newfound interest in my work felt both validating and bittersweet, representing the support I had always craved but had never received when I needed it most. As I drifted off to sleep, I felt a sense of closure about the years of family disappointment and a growing excitement about the opportunities ahead. The Harvard Merit Scholarship had given me more than just access to an elite education. It had given me the confidence to trust my own judgment about my worth and potential, regardless of others' opinions or expectations. The journey from family disappointment to Harvard Scholar had been completed, but I understood that the real adventure was just beginning. The weeks following the Harvard reception brought a period of adjustment that none of us had anticipated. My acceptance of the scholarship had created ripple effects throughout our family and social circle that continued to surprise me with their intensity and reach. Word of my achievement had spread quickly through Millbrook Heights, generating reactions that ranged from genuine congratulations to barely concealed skepticism from people who had witnessed my parents' previous assessments of my potential. Mrs. Henderson from down the street stopped by 3 days after the reception with a bouquet of flowers and tears in her eyes. "I always knew you were special, dear," she said, though I couldn't recall her ever showing particular interest in my academic pursuits before. When I heard about Harvard, I told my husband that good things happen to good people who work hard and help others. Her visit was followed by a steady stream of neighbors, family, friends, and acquaintances who seemed eager to associate themselves with my success after years of treating me as the disappointing Blackwood child. The sudden shift in social dynamics was both gratifying and uncomfortable, highlighting how quickly people could revise their opinions when presented with undeniable evidence of achievement. My mother had begun what could only be described as a campaign to rewrite family history. During conversations with friends and relatives, she started emphasizing aspects of my childhood that she had previously overlooked or dismissed. Suddenly, my independent reading habits were evidence of intellectual curiosity rather than antisocial behavior. My tendency to ask detailed questions about social issues was reframed as early signs of analytical thinking rather than annoying challenges to adult authority. I always encouraged Zara's interest in helping others. I overheard her telling Aunt Beatrice during a phone conversation. When she started volunteering at the community center, I knew it would lead to something meaningful. Parents have to trust their instincts about their children's potential. The fact that this service had led to extraordinary opportunities was gratifying, but the service itself had always been its own reward. The weeks before my departure for Harvard were filled with practical preparations that provided welcome distractions from the emotional intensity of family relationship changes. Shopping for dormitory supplies and course materials gave my mother opportunities to demonstrate support in concrete ways, even when emotional expressions remained difficult for her. "You'll need quality luggage that will last through 4 years of travel," she said during one of our shopping expeditions. And a good laptop that can handle whatever software your engineering courses might require. Her focus on practical details was characteristic of her personality, but it also represented her way of showing care and investment in my success. After years of feeling unsupported, I was learning to recognize and appreciate the different ways people express love and encouragement. My father approached preparation with typical thoroughness, researching everything from Harvard's academic calendar to the optimal banking arrangements for college students. His lawyer's attention to detail ensured that I would arrive on campus with all necessary documentation and resources, but his involvement also demonstrated a level of investment in my success that I had never experienced before. "I've been reading about Harvard's undergraduate research opportunities," he told me one evening. "The Kennedy School of Government has several programs that align with your interests in urban policy. I think you should schedule meetings with relevant faculty members during your first semester to explore potential collaborations." His advice was valuable, but more importantly, it showed that he was thinking seriously about my academic future and looking for ways to help me maximize the opportunities the scholarship provided. The contrast with his previous skepticism about my capabilities was striking and deeply meaningful. 3 weeks before my departure, I received an unexpected visit from Mr. Thornfield. He had requested a meeting to discuss my transition to Harvard and to share some thoughts about the journey ahead. We sat in his office at Westfield Academy, surrounded by the college brochures and guidance materials that had been part of our regular meetings throughout high school. "Zara, I want you to understand something important about what lies ahead," he began. "Harvard will challenge you in ways you haven't experienced before, not just academically but personally. You'll be surrounded by extraordinary people who have excelled in their own fields, and it's natural to sometimes feel overwhelmed or question whether you belong there." His warning about imposter syndrome echoed advice I had received from Damien, but hearing it from the person who had made my admission possible gave it additional weight. Mr. Thornfield knew my strengths and limitations better than anyone, and his confidence in my ability to succeed at Harvard was based on years of observing my work and character. "Remember that the admissions committee didn't make a mistake," he continued. "They selected you because they saw evidence of exceptional potential in your research and service work. Trust their judgment, even when you're struggling with challenging material or feeling intimidated by your classmates' accomplishments." He went on to share insights about the transition from high school to elite universities, drawing on his experience with previous students who had gone on to prestigious institutions. His advice about time management, relationship building, and academic strategy was practical and valuable, but the most important message was his continued belief in my ability to thrive in this new environment. "Your experience overcoming family skepticism and finding your own path has actually prepared you well for Harvard," he observed. "You've learned to trust your own judgment, to persist in the face of doubt, and to find motivation from internal sources rather than external validation. Those skills will serve you well when you encounter inevitable challenges and setbacks." Our conversation lasted over an hour, covering everything from course selection strategies to the importance of maintaining connections with home communities. When we finally concluded, Mr. Thornfield presented me with a book that had been meaningful to him during his own college years, The Courage to Act, by a former Federal Reserve chair who had navigated complex economic challenges through principled decision-making. "This book is about making difficult choices in the face of uncertainty and criticism," he explained. "I think you'll find resonance with the author's experience of trusting expert analysis over popular opinion and staying committed to long-term goals, despite short-term pressures. There are too many questions that need to be answered before we can properly evaluate this situation." His legalistic approach to what should have been a moment of family celebration felt like yet another rejection. But I had learned not to expect emotional support from parents who had never provided it before. The Harvard scholarship was real, regardless of whether they chose to acknowledge it immediately, and their verification process would only confirm what I already knew to be true. "The reception Dr. Castellano mentioned is this Saturday evening," I said, gathering my dishes to leave the table. "He invited the entire family to attend, so you'll have the opportunity to meet other scholarship recipients and their families. I think that might help you understand what this achievement actually means." As I prepared to leave the kitchen, Damien called after me. "Zara, wait a minute. Regardless of how Mom and Dad are processing this news, I want you to know that if this scholarship is real, it's an incredible accomplishment. Harvard Merit Scholarships are legendary in academic circles. The fact that you earned one means you're operating at a level that most people never reach. His words were the closest thing to family support I had received since the phone call, and they meant more to me than he could possibly understand. For my entire life, Damien had been held up as the standard of excellence that I could never meet. Hearing him acknowledge my achievement with genuine respect felt like a fundamental shift in our sibling dynamic. "Thank you," I said simply. "That means a lot coming from you." But even as I appreciated Damien's recognition, I was acutely aware that my parents remained skeptical and defensive. Their inability to celebrate my success revealed the depth of their investment in their narrative about my limitations. Accepting that I had earned one of the most prestigious academic honors in the country would require them to acknowledge that they had been wrong about me for years, and that acknowledgement seemed to be more difficult than I had anticipated. I spent the rest of the morning in my room, researching Harvard's academic programs and trying to process the emotional whiplash of the past 18 hours. The contrast between my family's reaction and Mrs. Rodriguez's immediate joy was stark and telling. The people who knew me best should have been the most excited about my success, but instead, they were the most resistant to believing it was possible. Around noon, I received a text message from Indira asking how the graduation party had gone. Her timing was perfect, and I called her immediately to share the incredible news about the scholarship. Her reaction was everything I had hoped for from my family. "Zara! Oh my God! Harvard University! I can't believe it! I mean, I can believe it because you're amazing, but I can't believe it actually happened. This is incredible. When do you start? What will you study? I'm so proud of you I could cry." Her enthusiasm and genuine excitement were exactly what I needed after the morning's difficult conversation with my family. Indira had been my closest friend throughout high school, and she had witnessed both my struggles with family expectations and my dedication to my research and volunteer work. Her immediate acceptance of my achievement felt like validation that the people who truly knew me weren't surprised by my success. "The crazy part is that I never even applied," I explained. "Mr. Thornfield submitted everything without telling me because he knew I wouldn't believe I had a chance." "That man is a saint," Indira replied. "He saw what your family couldn't see, what you couldn't even see in yourself. Your research work was incredible, Zara. I remember you staying up until 3 in the morning, analyzing housing policies and interviewing community members. And your literacy program has helped so many kids learn to love reading. Of course Harvard would want you." Her perspective helped me begin to internalize the reality that I had earned this opportunity through my own efforts and dedication. The scholarship wasn't a lucky accident or a case of mistaken identity. It was recognition of work I had done and potential I possessed. "How did your family react when you told them?" Indira asked. "About as well as you'd expect," I replied with a bitter laugh. "They're convinced there's been some kind of mistake. My father is planning to call Harvard to verify the offer because he can't believe it's real." "That's awful, Zara. This should be the happiest day of your life, and they're making you feel like you have to prove you deserve it." The gift was characteristically thoughtful, reflecting his understanding of both my interests and the challenges I might face. But more than the book itself, his gesture represented the continuation of mentorship that had been crucial to my development throughout high school. As my departure date approached, family dynamics continued to evolve in unexpected ways. My parents had begun planning what they called a send-off celebration that would include extended family members and close friends. The event they were organizing stood in stark contrast to the graduation party where I had been publicly declared bound for failure just weeks earlier. "We want everyone to understand how proud we are of your achievement," my mother explained as she reviewed guest lists and catering options. "This scholarship represents not just your success, but validation of our family's commitment to education and service." Her attempt to claim partial credit for my achievement was predictable, but I found myself caring less about her need to save face than about the genuine pride and support she was finally expressing. The celebration she was planning, regardless of her motivations, represented acknowledgement and recognition that I had craved throughout my academic career. The send-off party took place on a perfect summer evening in our backyard, with string lights illuminating conversations among family members, neighbors, teachers, and community center staff who had gathered to wish me well. The contrast with the graduation party atmosphere could not have been more dramatic. Instead of serving drinks while others were celebrated, I found myself at the center of attention, receiving congratulations and advice from people who were genuinely excited about my future. Dr. Martinez from the Community Center spoke eloquently about the impact of my literacy program and the leadership I had demonstrated in developing sustainable programming. Several teachers from Westfield Academy shared stories about my academic growth and the qualities they believed would contribute to my success at Harvard. Even relatives who had previously expressed skepticism about my potential offered warm support and encouragement. Uncle Sterling, who had toasted my inevitable mediocrity just weeks earlier, approached me with what appeared to be genuine remorse. "Zara, I owe you an apology for my comments at your graduation. I clearly didn't understand the kind of work you were doing or the potential you were demonstrating. Your achievement is extraordinary, and I hope you can forgive an old man's poor judgment." His apology was unexpected and appreciated, though it also highlighted how quickly social dynamics could shift when presented with undeniable evidence of success. The people who had been most critical of my potential were now most eager to associate themselves with my achievement, a pattern that taught me important lessons about the reliability of others' opinions versus the importance of internal motivation. As the evening progressed, I found myself in conversation with Mrs. Rodriguez, who had been one of the few people to consistently support and encourage my efforts throughout high school. Her reaction to my scholarship had been immediate joy rather than surprise, and her perspective on my journey was both insightful and comforting. "I always knew you had something special," she told me as we sat together on the garden bench, where I had spent many hours reading and studying. "You were always thinking about how to help other people, always working on projects that mattered. Some people didn't see it because they were looking for the wrong things, but that doesn't mean it wasn't there." Her words provided a valuable reminder that recognition of worth doesn't always come from the sources we expect or desire. Throughout my high school years, the validation I received from community center children, their families, and staff members like Mrs. Rodriguez had been more meaningful and accurate than my family's assessments of my potential. The final weeks before departure were marked by a series of conversations with my parents that felt like negotiations between people who were still learning to understand each other. My mother struggled with expressing emotional support directly, but she found ways to show care through practical assistance and subtle gestures of pride. "I've been telling everyone about your scholarship," she confided during one of our shopping trips. Mrs. Patterson at the grocery store said she always knew you were special, because you were so polite and thoughtful when you helped with her groceries. It made me realize that other people have been seeing qualities in you that I was too focused on grades and test scores to notice. Her admission represented significant personal growth and self-reflection. Acknowledging that she had missed important aspects of my character and potential was difficult for someone who prided herself on understanding and managing her children's development. But her willingness to recognize these oversights suggested possibility for more authentic relationship going forward. My father's approach was characteristically analytical, but his efforts to understand my goals and support my preparation demonstrated investment that went beyond obligation or social expectation. He had begun reading about urban development challenges in major cities, often sharing articles and policy analyses that related to my research interests. "I've been thinking about your work on sustainable development," he said during one of our final conversations before departure. "The legal frameworks governing land use and community input are constantly evolving. If you're interested, I could introduce you to some colleagues who specialize in municipal law and housing policy. Understanding the legal context might strengthen your research and policy recommendations." His offer of professional connections was generous and valuable, but more importantly, it demonstrated that he was thinking seriously about my academic goals and looking for ways to contribute to my success. The transformation from skeptical parent to supportive mentor had been remarkable to witness and experience. On my final evening at home, Damien knocked on my bedroom door with a wrapped package in his hands. Inside was a leather portfolio embossed with the Harvard seal and my initials, along with a handwritten note that brought tears to my eyes. "Zara," the note read, "I'm sorry it took a Harvard scholarship for me to recognize what an exceptional person you are. Your dedication to helping others, your perseverance in the face of doubt, and your commitment to meaningful work inspire me to be a better person and a better brother. I can't wait to see the amazing things you'll accomplish at Harvard and beyond. Love, Damien. His gift and message represented closure on years of sibling rivalry and competition for parental approval. The scholarship had somehow freed us both from the dynamics that had defined our childhood relationship, allowing us to appreciate each other's unique strengths and support each other's goals. As I packed my belongings for the journey to Cambridge, I reflected on the extraordinary transformation that had occurred in just a few months. The phone call from Harvard had changed more than my educational trajectory. It had fundamentally altered my family relationships and my understanding of my own worth and potential. The girl who had stood in the corner of a ballroom while her father declared her bound for failure was embarking on one of the most prestigious academic opportunities in the world. But more importantly, she had learned to trust her own judgment about her capabilities and to find validation from meaningful work rather than external approval. The Harvard Merit Scholarship represented vindication of years of dedication to research and service that others had failed to recognize or value. But it also represented the beginning of new challenges and opportunities that would require continued perseverance, integrity, and commitment to serving others. As my family gathered to say goodbye on departure morning, the atmosphere was filled with emotions that none of us had anticipated months earlier. My parents' pride was genuine, if tinged with regret about their previous skepticism. Damien's support was wholehearted and encouraging. Even extended family members who had questioned my potential were now eager to claim connection to my success. But beneath the celebration and well wishes, I carried the knowledge that this achievement belonged to me. The research, the volunteer work, the perseverance in the face of doubt, the willingness to pursue meaningful goals despite lack of family support, these efforts had earned recognition from people who evaluated merit objectively rather than through the lens of family expectations. The drive to Cambridge was filled with conversation about my goals, my courses, and my plans for making the most of the opportunities ahead. My parents asked thoughtful questions about my research interests and offered practical advice about time management and relationship building. Their engagement felt genuine rather than performative, suggesting that our relationships had evolved beyond their need to save face about their previous judgments. As we pulled onto Harvard's campus and I saw the iconic buildings where I would be studying for the next 4 years, I felt a mixture of excitement, gratitude, and determination. The scholarship had opened doors I had never imagined possible, but walking through those doors would require the same dedication and integrity that had earned the opportunity in the first place. The transformation from family disappointment to Harvard scholar was complete, but I understood that the real work was just beginning. The skills I had developed through years of independent research and community service would be tested and expanded in this new environment. The confidence I had gained by trusting my own judgment despite external doubt would be crucial for navigating challenges ahead. Most importantly, the scholarship had taught me that recognition and validation, while gratifying, were less important than the intrinsic value of meaningful work and service to others. The children I had taught to read, the communities I had researched and advocated for, the problems I had attempted to solve, these efforts had value regardless of whether they led to prestigious opportunities. As I walked through Harvard Yard for the first time as a student, surrounded by other exceptional young people who had earned their places through dedication and achievement, I felt profound gratitude for the journey that had brought me to this moment. The path from family skepticism to academic recognition had been difficult, but it had also been transformative in ways that extended far beyond college admission. The Harvard Merit Scholarship was not just an educational opportunity. It was validation that meaningful work and perseverance in the face of doubt could lead to extraordinary outcomes. But more than that, it was confirmation that my worth had never been determined by others, opinions, or expectations, and that the most important recognition had always come from the positive impact of my efforts on the communities I served. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.